Imagine being a child, raised in a home where you should have felt safe, loved, and protected. But what if the very person you trusted most, the one who should have been your guardian, betrayed you in the most unimaginable way? A young girl named Andrea Michelle Bowman faced this reality when, at just 14 years old, she accused her adoptive father of something unspeakable. She made a choice that would change everything, but no one knew how truly devastating the consequences would be. Andrea's life was filled with moments of joy, but also the darkness of secrets held tightly behind closed doors. For years, her story remained one of mystery and heartache, a case that seemed to have no answers, no resolution. She disappeared one night, vanishing without a trace, and the world moved on. But for her biological mother, Kathy Turkanian, the search for the truth never stopped. What was supposed to be a simple missing persons case soon became something far more complex and chilling, a twisted tale that would not fully unfold until decades later. And in the end, the truth would be even more shocking than anyone could have imagined. I want you to hold onto that thought. A girl gone, a family torn apart, and a mystery that hung in the air for over 30 years. What happened to Andrea? What was the real story behind her disappearance? Was it really as simple as her running away, or was something far more horrific at play? Stay with me as I unravel this story, piece by piece, layer by layer. From an accusation that no one could have ignored to a confession that would break hearts and send shockwaves through an entire community. As we move through this chilling account, you'll begin to understand the extent of the tragedy and just how long it took for justice to catch up. What are your thoughts on the case so far? Leave a comment below and share your reflections. Trust me, you won't believe how this all ends. Andrea's story began long before she was known by the name that would ultimately haunt the memories of those who loved her. Born Alexis Miranda Badger on June 23, 1974, in New Orleans, Louisiana, her life started with uncertainty. As an infant, Andrea's biological mother, Kathy Turkanian, made the painful decision to put her up for adoption. It's difficult to imagine the sorrow that must have gripped Kathy's heart when she made this choice, but the hope was always there, a hope that her daughter would find a better life in a loving home. At just 21 months old, Andrea was taken into the arms of Dennis and Brenda Bowman, a couple from Hamilton, Michigan. To many, this would have seemed like a fresh start for a little girl who had already faced a turbulent beginning. She became a Bowman, joining a family who would raise her in a rural part of Michigan, far from the city lights of New Orleans. There, she would grow up, surrounded by open fields, tall trees, and quiet nights. On the surface, this seemed like an idyllic setting for a young child, the kind of peaceful environment where nothing could go wrong. But even in the quietest of places, danger can lurk in the shadows, and secrets can fester in the most unlikely corners. Dennis and Brenda Bowman, the couple who adopted Andrea, appeared on the outside to be an ordinary family. Dennis, a man with a tough exterior, was known for his quiet nature, while Brenda, his wife, was more approachable, often seen around town with a warm smile. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, the cracks were already starting to show. The couple had been married for several years before adopting Andrea, and though they appeared to be a perfect match for a child in need of a family, there were things about Dennis that no one fully understood. What kind of man was he really, and what kind of father did he become to Andrea? As Andrea grew up in the small, rural town of Hamilton, Michigan, she found herself a part of a world that seemed to be frozen in time. The town was small, the streets quiet, and the neighbors, though friendly, kept to themselves. This was the kind of place where secrets were easy to bury, and stories stayed locked behind closed doors. There were few distractions, and everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least, that's how it appeared. For Andrea, this meant that her life would play out in the shadows of the Bowman home, where everything that happened within the walls was often hidden from the world. Her early years in Michigan were marked by a childhood that seemed peaceful on the surface. She attended school, made friends, and did the things that any child in a small town might do. But as with many stories that start off seemingly perfect, there were moments of tension, moments where the mask of a happy family began to crack. Was it the isolation of living in a small town that made Andrea's life feel stifling? Or was it something more, something darker, that began to shape the young girl's fate? It was around the time Andrea entered her teenage years that the first whispers of trouble began to surface. She became more withdrawn, more distant. She had always been a bit of an introvert, but now there was a coldness in her demeanor, an intensity to her eyes that wasn't there before. Those who knew her noticed it, a certain unease in her presence, a guardedness that made it hard to truly understand her. And then, in late 1988, Andrea made a bold and terrifying accusation. It was a claim that would change everything, not just for her, but for the family she had been a part of for most of her life. But before we delve into that, we need to understand the environment in which Andrea was raised. In a small town like Hamilton, where people often kept to themselves, there was no room for secrets. At least, not the kind that everyone would pretend to ignore. In the quiet of the Bowman home, however, things were never as peaceful as they seemed. Andrea may have once felt the warmth of a family's love, but something about the quiet presence of Dennis Bowman seemed to cast a shadow over her childhood. The questions began to pile up. What had truly gone on behind those closed doors? What did Andrea know, and what had she witnessed? Was it the isolation of this small town that kept her trapped in a cycle of fear, or had she sensed something more sinister lurking just beyond her reach? I want to know, how do you think growing up in a small town might have affected Andrea's life? Did it help hide the secrets that would later unfold, or did it only make things worse for her? Let me know in the comments. In the fall of 1988, when Andrea was just 14 years old, the quiet facade of the Bowman household was shattered by a startling revelation. Andrea made a claim that would send shockwaves through her family and the small town of Hamilton, Michigan. She accused her adoptive father, Dennis Bowman, of molestation. This wasn't just an idle accusation. It was an accusation that would forever alter the course of her life, the lives of her adoptive parents, and the community around her. What would lead a young girl who had been adopted into a family to make such a grave claim? What could have possibly driven her to voice such a deeply personal and painful experience? There are few things more powerful than a teenager standing up against someone in a position of authority, especially someone they were supposed to trust completely. The truth behind Andrea's accusations remains a mystery in many ways. Did she see something that made her fear for her safety? Or was she acting out of desperation to bring attention to a hidden reality that no one had recognized before? While we can never fully know what Andrea was feeling in those moments, it's clear that something had fundamentally changed in her. Perhaps it was the mounting isolation, the confusion about her feelings, or the simple truth that she had nowhere else to turn. But Andrea's words were not taken lightly. This was a teenage girl who had lived in a world filled with tension, who had seen cracks form in her family's foundation. Her accusations brought the turmoil into the open, casting a dark shadow over a life that had already been complicated by so many unanswered questions. Dennis Bowman's reaction to the allegations was one of complete denial. According to reports, he vehemently denied Andrea's claims, dismissing them as a fabrication. He claimed that his daughter, for reasons unknown to him, had made up the story, perhaps out of some misguided rebellion or a desire for attention. In the face of such serious accusations, Dennis was unwavering, and for a time, his word was enough. He portrayed himself as the victim of an unruly teenager, trying to tarnish his name. But what effect did this have on Andrea? How could she deal with a world that didn't believe her, that sided with the man she had accused? The family dynamic began to shift as Dennis and his wife, Brenda, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the weight of the accusations hung over their home like a suffocating cloud. Brenda, caught in the middle, seemed to stand by her husband unwilling or perhaps unable, to confront the possibility that the man she had loved and built a life with could have been capable of such acts. It's not hard to imagine the confusion and heartache Andrea felt in that moment, surrounded by a family that seemed unwilling to support her. Was Dennis Bowman the man he claimed to be? Did he have a history of abusive behavior, or were the accusations a result of some deep-seated conflict within the family? There's much to question here, much to wonder about. No one truly knew Dennis the way Andrea did. At least, no one truly understood the depths of her fears, her pain, and the confusion that may have driven her to speak out. Were there signs that had been missed? Had she been carrying this secret for years, only now finding the courage to confront it? Or was it something else entirely, a cry for help that fell on deaf ears? At the heart of this tragic moment was Andrea's state of mind. In her eyes, the world had already begun to unravel. She had to have known how serious her accusation was. What did she expect would happen after she spoke out? Was she hoping for someone to believe her, or did she feel as though she had no other choice? For a 14-year-old girl dealing with these emotions and experiences, it must have been nothing short of overwhelming. How many times had she stayed silent, hoping that things would improve, only to find herself trapped in a situation where speaking out was her only escape? This was a pivotal moment in Andrea's life, a point of no return. Her relationship with Dennis, the man who had been her father for over a decade, was forever changed. But it wasn't just Dennis who was affected. Andrea's life, her future, and her sense of safety would never be the same. And so began a chain of events that would leave her life and her disappearance in question for decades. What do you think led Andrea to make such serious accusations? Was it a cry for help, or was there something more to the story? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss the complexity of what Andrea might have been going through. March 11th, 1989. This date would become etched in the memories of those who knew Andrea and those who would come to learn of her tragic fate. On this day, Dennis Bowman made a chilling report to the authorities. His 14-year-old daughter, Andrea, was missing. According to Dennis, Andrea had run away from home after stealing money from the family. The story he told painted the picture of a troubled teen who had decided to leave everything behind in a moment of rebellion. But what if this was just a convenient story? An explanation that could deflect suspicion away from him, a way to distance himself from the accusation that was hanging over his head. Dennis claimed that Andrea had stolen money from him and decided to run off, abandoning her life, her family, and her home. But did this explanation make sense? Was Andrea truly the kind of girl to steal and then disappear without trace? Or was there something far more sinister at play, a reason for her to leave that no one could fully understand until years later? In the hours that followed, law enforcement responded to the missing person report. The small town of Hamilton, Michigan, was shaken by the sudden disappearance of one of their own. But as the investigation began, something unsettling became clear. Andrea's case was being treated as a runaway situation. Law enforcement did what they could, but with little evidence and no clear motive, the case was quickly categorized as such. Andrea, in their eyes, was simply a rebellious teenager who had decided to leave. There was no indication of foul play, no clear signs of abduction, and no physical evidence pointing to anything other than a runaway. It's easy to understand why this conclusion was made. Andrea had accused her father of molestation not long before, and it's possible that people saw her actions as an attempt to flee the uncomfortable reality she had faced at home. But was this truly the case, or had something far darker taken place in the shadows of the Bowman home? The idea of a runaway case, while plausible, didn't fully fit with the mystery of Andrea's disappearance. The weeks turned into months, and the months into years. Law enforcement seemed to hit a dead end. No new leads, no witnesses, no signs of Andrea. Her disappearance became one of those cases that lingered in the cold files of unsolved mysteries, unanswered, unresolved. It seemed as though the answers would never come, And for the people who cared about Andrea, the pain of not knowing was a constant ache that never went away. Andrea's biological mother, Kathy Turkanian, could not accept that her daughter had just disappeared without a trace. She had already lost her daughter once, and now she found herself losing her again, this time to the silence of the world around her. For over 3 decades, Kathy held on to the hope that one day the truth would come to light. She spent countless hours trying to uncover any new information, pushing for answers in a world that seemed to have forgotten Andrea. The frustration Kathy must have felt is unimaginable. The years passed, but her search for closure, for the truth, never stopped. What had really happened to her daughter? In the meantime, Dennis Bowman moved on with his life, or at least it appeared that way. His story of Andrea running away had been accepted, at least by those who knew him. Life went on, but the unanswered questions hung in the air. Was it truly just a runaway situation? Or was there more to this story than anyone had realized? I want to know, what do you think happened during those first few hours after Andrea's disappearance? Was it really a runaway situation, or was there something much darker that no one could see at the time? Comment your thoughts below, and let's delve deeper into the mystery that surrounded Andrea's vanishing. In November of 2019, Dennis Bowman, the man who had long been the subject of suspicion in Andrea's case, was arrested for a completely unrelated crime. He was taken into custody for the 1980 murder of 25-year-old Kathleen Doyle in Norfolk, Virginia. The case had remained unsolved for decades, but Bowman's arrest for that crime would unwittingly spark the unraveling of another dark secret, one that had been buried for over 30 years. As the investigation into Bowman's past deepened, authorities began to re-examine Andrea's disappearance with new eyes. What had once been labeled as a runaway case was now under the microscope, especially in light of Bowman's violent history and his connection to 2 very different murder investigations. The possibility that Andrea's disappearance was linked to something far more horrific than a simple runaway case began to gain traction. In early 2020, after his arrest, Bowman made a shocking confession, one that sent ripples of disbelief and horror through those who had been following the case for years. He admitted to killing Andrea, revealing the details of her death in a chilling and heart-wrenching statement. According to Bowman, the tragedy began with an argument between him and his adoptive daughter. He described how, during the altercation, he struck Andrea, an act that caused her to fall and hit her head. The impact was fatal, and Andrea was left unconscious. In his panic, Bowman did the unthinkable. He dismembered her body and buried the remains in the backyard of his property in Allegan County, Michigan. This confession sent shockwaves through everyone involved. For over 3 decades, Andrea's case had remained an open wound, with no answers, no closure, and no justice. Now, the truth was finally out, but it came at an unbearable cost. The revelation that Andrea's life had been stolen so violently, so suddenly, was incomprehensible to many, and the haunting details of Bowman's actions left an indelible mark on those who had followed the case for so long. On February 4, 2020, just days after Bowman's confession, authorities excavated Bowman's backyard in search of Andrea's remains. As investigators carefully dug through the soil, what they uncovered was every bit as horrific as Bowman had described. The remains of Andrea were recovered, confirming the truth of his confession and providing a final, devastating answer to a question that had lingered for decades. Andrea, who had vanished in the spring of 1989, was finally found. But the discovery was bittersweet. Her biological mother, Kathy Turkanian, had spent over 30 years searching for her daughter, and now she was forced to face the grim reality that the person she had hoped to bring home was gone forever. The emotional impact of this discovery was profound. For Kathy, the pain of learning that her daughter's life had been taken so violently was a gut-wrenching blow. But there was also a sense of relief that, at long last, the truth had come to light, even if it was more devastating than anyone could have imagined. The remains of Andrea represented the end of a decades-long search for answers, but they also marked the beginning of the long and difficult journey toward healing for those who loved her. The recovery of Andrea's remains was a pivotal moment in the case, but it was also a stark reminder of the lengths to which Dennis Bowman had gone to conceal his crime. His actions, fueled by a twisted desire to cover up the truth, had stolen Andrea's life, leaving her loved ones to mourn in silence for far too long. When Bowman's confession was revealed to the public, it sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. People who had once dismissed Andrea's disappearance as a mere runaway case now had to face the horrific reality of what had really happened. The truth had come out, but it had come too late for Andrea, who would never get the chance to tell her own story. How did you feel when Bowman's confession was revealed? Were you shocked by the details of his actions, or had you already suspected that something far darker had occurred? Drop a comment below with your reaction to this unthinkable discovery, and let's discuss the true impact of this tragic case. Dennis Bowman's arrest for the 1980 murder of Kathleen Doyle was just the beginning of a long legal journey. He was sentenced to life in prison for that crime, but it was his confession to the murder of Andrea that brought the case to a shocking conclusion. In 2021, Bowman pleaded no contest to second-degree murder in the death of Andrea, accepting responsibility for the tragic crime that had haunted the Bowman family for over 3 decades. Bowman's sentencing followed shortly after the plea, with the judge handing down a sentence of 35 to 50 years in prison for Andrea's murder. This sentence would run concurrently with his existing life sentences for the murder of Kathleen Doyle, meaning that Bowman would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. The public reaction to the plea and sentence was mixed. While some felt that justice had finally been served, others believed that Bowman's sentence did not fully reflect the gravity of his actions. For Andrea's biological mother, Kathy Turkanian, this moment marked the end of a decade-long quest for answers. Her persistence and determination to uncover the truth had never wavered, even as the years passed without any progress in the case. When she finally received the confirmation that her daughter had been taken from her in such a violent and senseless way, it was a bittersweet victory. Justice had been served, but it could never bring Andrea back. What do you think about Dennis Bowman's sentence? Do you believe justice was truly served? Share your thoughts below, and let's discuss the final chapter of this haunting case. Kathy Turkanian's emotional journey after learning of her daughter's disappearance was nothing short of heartbreaking. For years, Kathy clung to the hope that Andrea might still be alive somewhere, and that the truth would one day surface. The emotional toll of those years without closure was immense, but Kathy's relentless pursuit of justice never faltered. Her quest for truth was driven by a mother's love, a love that had never ceased even after so much time had passed. When Kathy finally learned the truth about Andrea's tragic death, the emotional impact was overwhelming. The pain of realizing that her daughter had been taken so violently, so senselessly, left an indelible mark on her heart. Yet, there was also a sense of relief that the mystery was finally solved. After decades of uncertainty, Kathy could finally mourn her daughter, knowing the truth, though it was a painful one. The public sympathy for Kathy and the case was palpable. Stories poured in from people who had followed Andrea's disappearance for years, feeling a deep connection to the case. Many expressed admiration for Kathy's persistence, and others shared their own stories of searching for loved ones, drawing parallels to her heartbreaking journey. Andrea Michelle Bowman's life was tragically cut short by the very person who should have protected her. Her story, filled with pain, loss, and confusion, ultimately led to the discovery of the truth, but only after a long and torturous road. Her journey reminds us of the importance of never giving up on the search for justice, no matter how long it takes or how painful the path may be. Andrea's legacy lives on, not just in the memories of those who loved her, but in the lessons we can learn from her story. It is a powerful reminder of the emotional depth of a mother's love and her determination to uncover the truth, no matter the obstacles. Kathy Turkanian's unwavering pursuit of justice serves as an inspiration to others facing similar challenges, showing that even in the darkest moments, hope and persistence can lead to answers. This case is a reminder of the importance of never giving up on justice. What are your thoughts on Andrea's case and the fight for truth? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true crime stories.